All right. Hey, everybody. It is 7 p.m. That means it's time for Iron Culture Live, presented by Mess. I am Eric Trexler. I'm here with Eric Helms. Producer's note, before we were going live, he was running his mouth. I had to give him the hand gesture of just shut the hell up, Helms. But we are here, and now you are officially encouraged to talk, Helms. So how are you doing, and how's your prep going?
I'm doing admonished. I am, as you know, a very insecure person. So when you shook your hand at me, I took that as you're a bad person and we're no longer friends. So I was doing fine until the last 5 seconds. But I will make it back. And that's why I need the support of all you folks in the live chat. How's my prep going? I'd say it's going well. I just got a response back from Alberto Nunez and Brian Miner, who commented on my recent progress. And we think we're on track. The goal is to get down to high 83s, low 84s as far as kilo body mass by the end of June, which I'm ahead of schedule right now. Here's the way you do it, Trex. You know this. When you've been in the game a long time, you target your old stage weight when you're a drug-free bodybuilder, regardless of the potential success that you may or may not have had in the off-season, and then you get pleasantly surprised or not.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to be pleasantly surprised. The lowest weigh-in I saw in 2023 on the scale was a depleted, maybe didn't drink as much water, 78.5 at the lowest part of prep. I am going to predict I don't think we're going to see under 80 this time, even in my lowest low weigh-in. So... yeah, another 3 pounds at least of muscle. That's pretty awesome, or lean body mass, I should say.
You could always do the old Trexler special and over diet, but then you can see
that is specifically why I have these guys in my corner, because I probably would.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, they're good at keeping me on pace, making sure I'm not dieting too quick. First show is going to be October 4th and 5th in Taiwan. So well ahead of the game. And then I'll be going all the way to WBF World's third week in November. So things are on track. Diet fatigue, all that good stuff is pretty minimal, to be honest. Like, this is just kind of me living life. I definitely don't have the same up and go energy to do the same kind of volume and training. And if I have a really active day, I can feel it a little bit. But those things have to align. And if for whatever reason I happen to be on relatively low calories on a given day and I have high expenditure, I do notice my sleep getting a little disrupted. But the goal is to not do that, right? And that's one of those actual, I would say, biofeedback things that are quite consistent to me, which is a good and a bad thing, right? Like, as I'm this lean or leaner, if I'm in a more than a couple hundred calorie deficit, this is what I think is going on, at least. I can almost predict that I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night and have to do a little bit of like meditation and, calmingness to fall back asleep. And I still can. I'm actually getting pretty good at that. So that's bad that I'm kind of tightrope walking poor sleep as I get leaner and leaner.
Yeah.
But it's good to know, since I'm not trying to lose too quickly, that tells me something. And then the next day I can pull the trigger on a refeed. And I sleep great on refeed days. So Anyway, prep's going great.
Do you think the sleep issues are more aggravated by the size of your deficit, or, how we often frame it is kind of the speed of your weight loss? Do you think it comes down to just your absolute body fat, or do you think it's a combination?
It definitely seems like the interaction. Yeah. Because I have no problem running a high deficit and sleeping fine when I am not as lean.
Yeah.
And there does become a point where my sleep can only get so good if I'm really lean, but it is definitely improved by it seems like truly the acute energy balance, but unfortunately not so acute that I can make up for with my last meal. It seems to have to do more along like the last day and the current day. So I often have 1 or 2 refeeds in a row, and then the day after that refeed is when I first start my deficit again, and I typically sleep well on that day regardless of if I'm aggressive. So I can kind of sneak in a bit of a like chip away, let's get back to a little more of a depleted state where I think I'm losing fat mass more consistently on that first day. But then I need to be cautious and just run like 200, 300 calorie deficit, because I'm not trying to lose that quick, if you did the math there, I've got what we think is probably 5 kilos to lose over the next, like, all of June, July, August, and September. So 4 months to lose 5 kilos. It's a good clip.
Yeah.
It's in terms of being conservative.
All right, good stuff, man. So prep's going well. What happened with Worlds? People put up some big numbers. Did that happened, right?
Worlds is still going on.
Still going
I
on.
think, yeah. Trex, the IPF powerlifting's big now. It's a full week of competition, and
Whole
it's
week.
grown so much. Yes. So the last competition I went to where they still combined junior, open, and masters together for Worlds, I want to say it was either 2017 or 2018. And now they have a separate junior Worlds, masters Worlds, and open Worlds. And each one of them typically has 1 to 2 weight classes per day, lasting most of a work week.
Yeah.
So Worlds is going on, and there's already been 2 pretty big upsets. And today there was also some awesome competition. So we've had already the 47 kilo women's class. We have had the 59 kilo men's class. And then we have had the 66 kilo men's class, as well as the 52 kilo women's class. And it was pretty, in some cases, all cases very exciting. In some cases a little bit surprising, and in some cases quite the nail biter. And let me just say that my fantasy league picks were in shambles after day one, due to one, what I would describe as an upset, and one unfortunate occurrence.
Helms, you failed me, brother. You were supposed to tell me to hit the record button, and I had to do that while you were giving me the update.
You know what? I did fail you, and I'm sorry, but I'm glad you remembered at least not too late into the episode. So we'll have timestamps. Only thing you have to remember is that we did a prep update and talked about Worlds for the timestamp.
Well, there you go.
Right after that.
So has anyone who's had the biggest standout performance so far in Worlds?
Okay, so let's go over it. We've had these 4 weight classes, all the lightweights. I think the biggest standout performance, I'm going to go ahead and give it to Heather Connor. So Heather Connor, you may remember, because she was the 47 kilo world champ right around the time when you probably stopped being involved in powerlifting. I want to say she won her first open world title in 2017. And then she was the reigning world champ through 2019. Then we saw the rise of Turbo Tiffany Chapon out of France, who, as a sub-junior and a junior, won 4 consecutive world titles, totaling in the low 400s and pushing basically the best total in the world at 47 above the 400 kilo mark. It used to be right in those 390s into the low 400s, as high as the 430 range. And Heather Connor has been on the podium, but has not been able to battle her. And also another 47 kilo lifter, the 48 kilo lifter, Jessica Espinal from the U.S. has been also challenging as the kind of second best in the world, alternating with Heather. So this year at PA Nats, as I've understood it from actually talking to Heather, she's been dealing with some health issues, and has finally overcome them, and is now no longer in pain relating to, and she's open about this, so I'm not disclosing, personal medical information, some cysts on her ovaries that have been removed and have enabled her to push harder in training and perform well. She had a standout PR performance at PA Nats, and she actually improved upon that, totaling 10 kilos more, finishing at 435, winning by half a kilo to dethrone Turbo Tiff and make a comeback, winning another world title after not having been able to win since 2019 in her mid-30s. So it's really awesome to see, and she did that by pulling what seemed to be a limit final deadlift, because she is a big deadlifter. So her bench is, of course, very good for anybody. You can't be a world-class lifter and be completely leaving one lift behind. But she's a good squatter, I would say world-class but average world-class bencher, and then one of the best deadlifters in the world. And she pulled 212.5, which is nuts for her body weight, to clinch that win and win by half a kilo, coming back on top. So that was the big one. Unfortunately, one disappointing outcome was that Kasam Sansenyumong from Thailand, who is dropping down from 66 to 59, and we were expecting him to punt the world record by 20 or 30 kilos, unfortunately hurt himself just a little bit prior to Worlds, and he was able to compete, but he was not in the running at all. And just he was an excellent competitor. He had a brave face. He said it was an honor to be a part of it, but he ended up being kind of towards that 10th position, if I recall correctly. But the cool thing is that from Spain, Campaña Diaz, he has been a medalist but never won, and he kind of fulfilled his potential today. Won and totaled 637.5, which is important because it was 95% of the current world record total, and he secured his invite to Sheffield. So that was day one. Both my top picks, I picked Turbo Tiff, and I also picked Kasim Sand as the winners. So I'm already in a rough shape as far as the King of the Lifts fantasy picks. But I got my
Did
two
you
picks
put a lot
today.
of Did you put a lot of money on your picks?
I'm in debt. So I put a lot of money on day one. Day two, I'm crawling out of that debt. I'm not at the point where I'm in risk of doing something unethical to try to get back square, but I'm really hoping that the rest of the world champs goes my way, or we're looking at me living on the street, being divorced, and I hope you don't mind being the sole host of Iron Culture. So this is important for everybody.
Yeah.
But today went well. Kel Beckland, he has now done some very, very impressive things in his career. This is the guy who Taylor Atwood had to come back and beat for his first world title. He had a resurgence in his career. He's a world champion in and out of equipment, and he won the Sheffield, dropping down to 66 kilos, and punted that world record, 770 at 66. He then went on to win European champs. He went back up to 74, and he totaled 740 there, kind of just doing what he needed to secure that victory. So now he's the Sheffield champ, he's the European champ, and now he dropped back down to 66 and just totaled 742. I think a solid 20 to 30 kilos, might have been 40 kilos ahead of the person behind him, solidifying himself as one of the greatest lifters of all time, now world champion in and out of equipment in multiple weight classes, which very, very, very few people can say. So big shout out to him. And then Evie Corrigan, the hometown hero, my personal friend, and now I believe a 3-time 52-kilo world champion. She totaled 480 to only win by 2.5 kilos ahead of fellow Kiwi, who placed in the silver position, Megan Lee Smith. Prior to World Championships, Evie did not pull her last deadlift. She decided she didn't want to break the world record with her third deadlift so that she could do it at the Sheffield and have more competitive placing, because that's based upon the percentage over the world record. But she had to this time. She had to pull it, or she would have actually been in silver. So the interesting storyline here is that Megan Lee Smith may be coming to the point where she could potentially eclipse Evie in the future. So we're seeing this domestic battle in New Zealand of who can be the top 52-kilo lifter, and they're neck and neck now. It had to come down to the final pull and a 2.5 kilo spread. So anyway, good news for New Zealand, but an interesting hometown battle between the two top 52s in the world and in the country. And that's where we're at with Worlds. I'll have more updates for you guys next episode of Iron Culture. I can do the recap of the whole Worlds if Trexler lets me, and I may have to allow him to talk about college football to do that.
Hey, it's Iron Culture, so whenever there's a big powerlifting meet, I am obligated to let you do your thing. I know people out there, this is one of the places they get that information. You know what I mean? It is true that I backed away a little bit from the powerlifting world at approximately, you got your dates a little mixed up. It was about 2013, so I'm a little bit out of the loop.
It's the same era, the teens.
Yeah. I just got into the teens there, but no, I know people love it. I love that people love it, and so I'm going to let you do your thing. I will talk about college football eventually, but I need to cool off. It's not really going to heat up until end of August. So if I talk about it a lot now, it's just going to get me too excited for it, and then I'm just going to have to wait. This offseason has felt so long, and I just need it to come back immediately. But Helms, what was I going to... did I have any updates? What was I going to talk about?
Well, I think we were eventually going to talk about differences between combat athletes, strength athletes, and bodybuilders in their cutting. But I think that is something you might have discussed briefly on Front Page Fitness. But I think you were also going to discuss an article that you're working on for the upcoming issue of
Yeah.
NAS on body composition.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't have any cool updates about contest prep or anything like that. Uh, Now, quick correction. I do want to plug Front Page Fitness. If you're not watching or listening to it, it's a podcast. It's me and Lauren Colenso Semple. It's on YouTube. It's gone everywhere that you get Iron Culture. You can get Front Page Fitness. Definitely check it out. We were not talking about cutting there, but we will talk about it later this evening. But yeah,
Gotcha.
the update on my end was I was writing a fun little article for the upcoming issue of Mass, which will come out July 1st. And it's I like it because it kind of merges my wheelhouse of the fitness world with my new stomping grounds, which is like the evolutionary anthropology world. So it was a fun little paper about physical attraction. The idea of being attracted in a sexual way. So attractiveness, ratings in terms of preferences, and what they were looking at here was kind of body shape. So instead of having like a picture of a beautiful person and saying, "Hey, do you think this person is more attractive than that person?" They were literally rating the attractiveness of DEXA scans. And so, Helms, you and I both know it. A DEXA scan is basically like you're like rating how sexy is a faceless Michelin man. It's just this like grayscale blob, and the different how dark the grayscale is reflects the density of the tissue and so on. So very, very odd thing. I'm sure that everyone in the study it needed some explanation for like, what are we really getting at here? Because none of these faceless Michelin Man characters are particularly sexy to me. But what they were doing is just kind of like giving ratings of different, BMIs and body compositions and how much you had a V taper versus less of a V taper, kind of the shoulder to waist ratio, things like that. But it was a fun little article where I got off on this tangent about there's actually a lot of studies like this where they show people different things and they're not really trying to like prime them for what they're rating necessarily, but a lot of times, sometimes they'll just show them a person's face and they're supposed to rate the attractiveness. And there's studies where they're rating the attractiveness of females and the attractiveness of males. All sorts of different combinations of males rating males, females rating males, the whole deal. But they won't really tell you exactly what they're trying to get at, but a lot of it has to do with adiposity, or kind of like basic markers of masculinity, for example. So those are some of the things that these evolutionary researchers are often kind of interested in for some of their evolutionary hypotheses. So maybe they'll show you like 10 different faces that have been digitally put together. They're not actual pictures of real people. And what they're really showing you is like from underweight to overweight or obese, you're seeing the kind of facial changes that would go with a BMI change, but you can't actually see their body shape. Or maybe they're showing you the body shape without the face to make it, just completely about the physique and the form of the body. And again, they'll show you, low BMI, high BMI, muscular, not muscular, the whole deal. And the article, I had a lot of fun writing it, but one of the takeaway points that I think is really important, one of the things I focus on in the article is that this fitness industry, Helms, that we know and love, it's got its upsides, it's got its downsides. I think one of the downsides is it tends to reinforce not just an unrealistic, but a really distorted concept of what it takes to have like a good body, quote unquote, in the eyes of whoever you're trying to impress. And so one of the things that you find pretty consistently in this literature is that like in terms of muscularity, you tend to find the highest like attractiveness ratings at essentially like just slightly above average for muscularity. And when it comes to body fat levels or BMIs that you can kind of loosely translate to body fat levels, people are not going wild over shredded physiques of like 5, 6, 7% body fat. And Helms, you and I both know this because I know that when I've done prep, like I gave a little jab to myself about over dieting. For context, the last time I prepped, when I was 15 pounds over stage weight, DEXA had me at 6.2% body fat. And then I cut 15 pounds from there. And 15 pounds, like I only cut like 40 in the prep, or like 35-ish. So I was like 2/3 of the way done with my prep. DEXA had me at like 6%, and I did a whole other third, basically, which is ill-advised. Not a good idea. The last 5 pounds I would have preferred to keep. But anyway, all that is to say, Helms, you and I have both done the dig of a deep prep. People are not asking you, like, hey, you want to go to the movies on Friday? They're asking, are you okay, and what can I do to help? Like, I literally had people asking around in my workplace if I was afflicted with some kind of serious, perhaps terminal illness. And that's not to make light of it. That really happened. So all that is to say,
Same.
you're not looking your best when you're like 6% body fat. You just aren't. And so it's one of those funny things in fitness, this distortion where a lot of this research tends to show that like the sweet spot where these attractiveness ratings, of course, they're very subjective, but where they really start to peak on average in the aggregate is essentially the body fat levels that are really associated with what I think we could call kind of the optimal range for both health and fertility, which again, from an evolutionary perspective, makes a lot of sense. And when you consider like, in a place like America where the average BMI is overweight now, what that ends up looking like is having what we would, from a societal perspective, call a fairly lean but not shredded physique is kind of where those attractiveness ratings peak. And so I think it's really a shame that there's like a lot of people in the fitness world who get content from us who maybe they feel compelled, like, in fitness, you'll literally hear people say like, well, I'm pretty pudgy at the moment at 13% body fat. And it's like, dude, that is a pretty insane thing to say. And they're like, but maybe if I cut down to like 6 or 7% body fat, then I'll feel attractive. And it's like, you're actually going from like scientifically about the sweet spot for males. It tends to be, depending on which study you look at, around 13, maybe as low as 10 or 11, maybe as high as 15, 16. But about 13% body fat is like the attractiveness sweet spot, which is also like a very healthy, if you look at the mortality data, it's where you pretty much are maximizing your health. And actually a little lower than where some studies say you maximize your health. But I get into that where those studies also, I think, the penalty of frailty is kind of pushing the optimal body fat for mortality up a little bit. So I think if you're a strong, lifting, muscular person, you can probably shift that down a little. But anyway, a lot of people are cutting from the scientifically most attractive body fat range into an objectively less attractive body fat range and doing it in the sake of attractiveness and feeling like absolute dog shit in the process. So my article is kind of a recalibration of like, let's actually like talk about the reality of what we see when we actually look at this objectively. Not that you should be making all your body comp decisions about who you think might think you're sexy if you do it. But another thing I get into there, I have all my caveats and disclaimers of like, hey, for your body comp, do what you want to do. Don't worry about that stuff. But frankly, if you're trying to make everyone else think you're sexy and you're tapped into the fitness world, you're probably actually wrong. So that's kind of one of the big, you'll probably make your life way harder than it needs to be and pushing yourself to a range that is just not sustainable and also maybe not perfectly optimal for health and fertility outcomes. But another thing I wanted to mention.
Do you want to hear a fun aside that is could potentially derail us? I can save it.
Let me hit my high note here, and then you give me the aside. Okay.
I got it.
Other thing I wanted to mention about the kind of distortion that we see in the fitness world. You hop on Instagram, every fitness influencer is like 7% body fat and has a fat-free mass index of 29, and you feel like shit, right? But I was recently poking around in the NHANES data, helping out Jeremy Etier for a video that actually just went live today over on his channel. Little known YouTuber. Give him a follow for charity. He's only got like 7 million. So
I just don't know that he's going to hit 8 million this year, Trex.
I think it's important for people with big platforms like us to kind of shout him out and try to help him out, So, but he just had a video up and you and I are both in it. But for that video, I was doing some background research. Because like in the fitness world, if you talk about like, I want to cut down to 12% body fat, a lot of people say, and then what? Or then are you going to actually try to get lean after that? Like, which is crazy. So in the Ed Haynes data set, I got like an 8-year range of data, had data from 9,000 American men. And this is just kind of like a broad cross section of America. And less than 3% of American men had a body fat level below 15% body fat. So you're already in the 97th percentile of leanness if you're down at 15% body fat or lower. And if you look at getting under 12% body fat, one Helms, not 1% of men, one man in this 9,000 man data set had a body fat percentage below 12%. And Lord knows what his situation was. He was either a fitness enthusiast or he was wasting away, and we have no idea. But we could probably, I should look into that just for when I have some free time. I'm going to look into that and see which of the two it was, because there are ways to find that out. Very possible.
Yeah, Amish guy who walked into the wrong building. It's like, yeah, sure, I'll participate.
Yeah. Notoriously high activity level, very low body fat levels on average in certain Amish communities, for sure. You've written about that before. But all that is to say, like, it's really important that we kind of recalibrate our understanding of what lean is and what it takes to kind of get into, to the extent you care about this. And again, in my article, I do a much more eloquent job of giving the preface of saying, listen, I'm not really that into setting your fitness goals based on trying to make people think you're sexy. It's subjective anyway. Like if you're choosing your partners based on body fat level alone, you're going to have a pretty rough 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s and beyond. So it's probably not the best way to go about choosing your partner, or trying to attract partners, because body fat is a bit transient, Helms. But anyway, I get through all the caveats of like, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to worry too much about this. But ironically, in the fitness industry where we're so focused on body fat, we have a totally distorted view of what normal is, what lean is, and then also apparently what attractive is. And so it's a fun little article there. All right, Helms, you were going to derail us with an aside, and I think this is a great time to do it.
No, I'm here for it. So I just wanted to provide the same commentary that bolsters what you were saying about how you don't necessarily reach peak attractiveness when you reach peak bodybuilding shape.
Yeah.
And you'll appreciate this as now being a cat dad. My wife and I, like I mentioned, for the entirety of our relationship until the last couple of years, have had cats, and we've been together. We'll be married 20 years in January. We have terminology when I get to the point where she is no longer, and I'm also no longer a fan of my own body. And that is reaching a state which we like to call cat butt. So, if you've ever seen a cat, you can just see their anus from the rear, and that is because they do not have butt cheeks. And when a person gets lean enough to lose all of their body fat on their butt to where it begins to look more like a walnut in terms of the striations, or even a rib cage if you've got prominent glutes, depending upon the attachment shape and the position of the body, you can be in a similar position to a feline who does not need to be low in body fat for you to be their anus if you are lean enough. So there is a point where I reach a similar state, and we call that cat butt. And at that point, it also coincides with me essentially having no visible subcutaneous fat anywhere else. And that is a point where I do not like to sit on anything that is not cushioned. And I also hate the way my face looks, because I can literally see the shape of my skull, which I hate. And it goes from, oh, he has a chiseled jawline to, are you dying? And I can visibly see when I am glycogen depleted or dehydrated in my face. And if I'm glycogen depleted in my cheek muscles, a little bit dehydrated, and at the stage of what we call cat butt, I look like I am like some type of pandemic survivor, Walking Dead, whatever, like you said, someone asked you if you're terminally ill. I have definitely had people come up and ask me, are you okay? What's going on during prep?
Yeah.
And I would say that right now, Trex, I'm at the point where as I get any leaner, I think I will be getting less attractive for my own purposes, like personal preferences. Because each time I look on one of these podcasts, I see a week of slightly overly chiseled jawline, and where it's like, it's not a jawline, it's a skull line. Like, I don't want to see that much. So
Yeah.
we'll see how we go from here. When you can see the temple indents, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I gotta say, Holmes, we've known each other a while. I don't think you
Mm.
surprise me that often, but I am genuinely surprised at how repulsive this particular aside has been. The idea of what you call cat butt is
Yes.
so gratuitously graphic and
Mm.
so obscene.
Yep.
Um, I not only would I understand if everyone listening and joining in the YouTube live chat left immediately,
Yeah.
I think I'm actively judging those who stay. I think I might try to go through and figure out how to ban anyone who did not leave after that, because that is
Mm.
truly about as repulsive an example I could possibly think of. Um, and so with that being said,
Yes.
we had a question. Maybe we spend 10, 15 minutes before we answer some questions in the live chat. But a really good question that came in the after hours portal. And of course, if you want to submit a question anytime, 24/7, 365, you can go over to massresearchreview.com/iron culture and submit a question there. But somebody is basically asking, we talk so much about doing these preps for competition, whether it's bodybuilding or, powerlifting. You can think of, kind of a longer term prep and then a short term weight cut. And then, of course, there's also combat sports where we see people kind of really strategically plan out a body weight plan, as they kind of get closer to competition. And then, of course, there's sometimes a pretty extreme weight cut in certain combat sports. And so somebody was basically asking us to compare and contrast these very different type of cuts. And so I have now, Helms, you are the Swiss Army knife of iron sport. You've done every iron sport there is to be done. But have you done a
Closest.
combat sport?
No, no. The goal is to look like I could fight so that hopefully people think that they will not want to fight me. And then if I do get assaulted and intimidation doesn't work, I just offer them all the money I have.
I mean, from a legal perspective, that's the most advisable thing. You generally don't have a lot of positive outcomes that come from physical altercations. However, I will say this. I'll take a quick stab at this as the meathead, the person who just has practical experiences, has done all three, done, powerlifting, bodybuilding, and combat sport cuts. And then you can come in as the nerd, lab coat, pencil neck dweeb who has a PhD student who just submitted, I think, a draft of their dissertation work that is on this topic itself, correct?
Yes, shout out to Kendrick Kwan, who's currently coaching at IPF Worlds. We're due to submit his thesis probably as soon as he's back for actual examination for his PhD.
Wow, look at that. All right, so here's what I would say. First things first, when it comes to setting up some similarities. The general premise is if I'm doing a combat sport, powerlifting, bodybuilding, I have some kind of plan for how much I want to weigh at my competition, and what kind of composition I want my body to be in by the time competition rolls around. So that is the similarities. We have to plan out, going to get to a certain weight on a certain date. How am I going to make that work? Now, a huge bifurcation right off the bat is powerlifting and combat sport. I have to actually do stuff with my body. So I have to actually be in a state where I can perform my best. Bodybuilding, not so much. I basically have to be able to stand, flex, smile, even though I'm in agony, and basically not cramp up and fall over. That's pretty much the athletic peak of bodybuilding is don't cramp and fall over. So right there, we know that what goes into these two preps is going to be very different, right? So for bodybuilding, you can't really do magic in the last 72 hours. Whereas for powerlifting and combat sport, you can really do a lot in the last 48, 72 hours, 96 hours to get over that last hump in terms of cutting weight. Usually, the more magic you try to do in bodybuilding, aside from some general best practices for peak week, you're probably going to screw things up more than you're going to save the day. So it's a very different thing where with bodybuilding, you really have to be on a smooth trajectory from over many, many, many weeks to kind of guide your way into that show weight. Whereas it's much more common to see fairly abrupt water cuts in powerlifting and combat sport. Now, for powerlifting combat sport, another thing you have to ask yourself is what physical capabilities do I need to maintain? And what is my timeline between weigh-in and competition? So what I mean by that is, let's say I'm a power lifter. I need to be able to have enough glycogen, creatine. I'm using my ATP, phosphocreatine, and a little bit of glycolytic system to do one repetition, which hopefully isn't lasting that long. The longer it lasts, the more I'm grinding it out. So in an ideal world, 3 lifts, smooth, all good. So we don't really need to worry too much about, just being absolutely overflowing with glycogen the same way with wrestling, depending on what level you're at. We're talking about 3 2-minute rounds per match. Sometimes it's 2, 2, and 3 minutes. So wrestling is a really brutal sport because you're kind of at your like glycolytic peak, but you maintain it for 2 minutes, take like 30 seconds to catch your breath, and then you do it again. It almost feels like some kind of slightly different repeated Wingate type protocol, where by the end of a match, it's not rare to feel like you're literally going to throw up. It's really highly glycolytic and anaerobic in nature. And you have to be able to intermittently have kind of maximal strength bursts, if you're going to lift up your opponent and return them to the mat. So it's like if you had to do like a heavy power clean in the middle of a 2-minute sprint, which is not a fun thing to do, to say the least. So you have to think about these physical capacities that are required, and that's going to impact, how far can I really push, for example, my glycogen depletion in these last 48, 72 hours? How quickly do I have to reverse some of that glycogen depletion? And in the case of wrestling, there's also a lot of strategy that goes into it. So when I was wrestling, I don't know what the rules are like these days, and they probably vary at different levels of competition. But for us, we'd usually go into a tournament, and you weigh in around 7:30 in the morning, 8 in the morning. And honestly, matches are going to get going maybe an hour, 90 minutes after weigh-ins. So let's say you just did a water cut and you cut like 7 pounds of water weight to get down to 130, and you haven't even thought about a carbohydrate in 2 days. Well, you have a match in like an hour. So that's kind of a problem. You need to get rehydrated, you need to get electrolytes in you, and you need to start replenishing carbohydrate. And so the strategy comes into play, which is, am I so good that I know I'm going to be a 1 seed or a 2 seed or a 3 seed in this 16-man bracket, where I know my first match, I could be physically a shell of myself and still win. And a lot of times, that's where you want to be going into a tournament. And so you might say, I'm going to weigh in at 135, looking like I'm steps away from death. My first match, I'm going to be technically in such a state, it's so outclassing my competition, it doesn't matter that I'm still almost dead. And by match 2, I'm feeling a little more myself. I probably weigh 3.5 more pounds than I weighed in. By match 3, now we're talking evening time, I'm really starting to feel it. And by the evening time match, it might be 6, 7, 8 p.m. I feel like $1,000,000. I weigh 8 pounds more than I weighed in at, and it's me and the next best guy in this tournament going head-to-head at our best. So there's a lot of strategy that goes into the timing and the capacities you need to recover within that short time frame. Now, with powerlifting, of course, you don't want to be fully glycogen depleted, as we talked about before. A fully or even highly depleted muscle is still not going to be able to generate maximal force, because we need to have some of that glycogen replenished near the sarcoplasmic reticula in the muscle to help really deal with calcium release and reuptake. So big misconception is like, how much glycogen could you need for 1 rep? 15% of your max storage. Incorrect. You start to see impairments in force production well before you're fully depleted. So you do want to take note of that and replenish that glycogen. But usually in powerlifting, it's not just because of the demands of the lift. It's not so critical that you are, doing like an endurance athlete type carbohydrate refeeding thing and really watching the clock like a hawk there. So Helms, that's my 2 cents on some of the similarities and differences. What do the nerds think? The pencil neck dweebs in the lab coats.
Well, I'm going to unfortunately have to include some of my practical experience here, having coached and cut for all these competitions and some of the nuances of strength and physique sport. But I think the thing to point out for physique sport is that if you're doing it right, your weight should actually increase as you're getting really close to competition, because one of the few strategies that is pretty consistently shown, and even actually has empirical pseudo-experimental data on it, is that carb loads seem to enhance physique appearance. And that will come with, and we have objective data showing that carbohydrate loading increases metrics of muscle size, which enhances the appearance of a silhouette. And in our case series, it seems to enhance appearance of muscularity. That shout out to Kai Homer. We're doing more work to publish that data. So anyway,
this is a very silhouette heavy episode of Iron.
It is. It really is. So nonetheless, the practices of bodybuilders varies, and you see far more enhanced bodybuilders who will cut water and believe that helps their look, which I could potentially believe because of the dual effects where anabolic androgenic steroids help retain intramuscular water retention as one of their effects, and depending upon their androgenicity and what other drugs are being used, may come with a substantial amount of total body water retention, which could be in the subcutaneous area. So you see far more enhanced bodybuilders reporting that some type of water manipulation or restriction seems to improve appearance, although there's debate there, and it probably has to do with drug protocols, tradition, a lot of things. In the natural world, though, you see far fewer bodybuilders doing at least extreme water manipulation, because one of the surest fire ways of looking flat is actually dehydrating yourself, and we have objective data on that as well. So if anything, you're carbohydrate loading, you're keeping water high as a drug-free physique competitor. And in my opinion, a good way of looking at this is there's the gradual weight loss phase, and then there's the acute manipulation. So the gradual weight loss phase, that should be ending relatively early compared to where most competitors do it in bodybuilding. I think a few weeks out is ideal. So then you can actually restore energy balance and start eating up, and you can ensure that you can process carbohydrates well, both digestively and enzymatically, in terms of actually storing glycogen and reach your fullest state without putting on body fat. So if anything, you were talking about just not passing out on stage as the standard. I'd say that's very traditionally true among bodybuilders who are still kind of old school cutting water, or maybe need to because of the drug protocol. But for natural bodybuilders following best practice, you probably feel the best you have for maybe a couple months in the last few weeks leading into competition.
To be fair,
yeah.
To elaborate, my commentary was on the actual requirement of the sport, not how you should feel.
True.
So I wasn't saying you should walk up there feeling dead, but I was kind of implying if you did walk up feeling dead,
pose.
yeah, if you did walk up feeling dead, you will not be disqualified due to inability to perform the sport, unless you fall over.
Very true. And I'll also say that at the highest level, posing lasts progressively longer the more competitive it is, and professional athletes in large or tight competitions, or amateur athletes who make the finals and have to do the overalls and multiple call-outs, really need to be aware, and I could say this having sat at the judging table a lot now, that if you have done something with your peaking protocol to where you can't sustain your poses, that can really quite easily hurt your placing. So those things need to be considered. So that's physique sport. If anything, stage weight should be going up. The other thing I will say is that the weigh-in processes in physique sport are typically much more lax in the bodybuilding division compared to combat sport power and strength sport, where they have these weight class restricted sports. You have lot numbers, specific times, specific clothing you got to wear, calibrated scales, officials, the whole 9 yards, a time window, and you can be not allowed to compete or miss your weigh-in if you muck around with that. Like if you compete in, besides the classic division in bodybuilding, it's like, oh, the day of, day before, whatever, we just need to place you. You don't want to take your pants off, that's fine. There in enhanced bodybuilding, there's a lot more true weight manipulation because people can decide to be on enough drugs to move up a weight class. I had a hilarious comment on my 2023 Worlds pose down, and they were like, Eric, do you think you'd be better as a heavyweight? Because you're the tallest guy in that class. I'm like, yes, I would. And he's like, you thought about moving up? And I'm like, I've been trying to move up to the heavyweights my entire career. I can't choose to gain another 5 pounds of muscle, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Doesn't work that way for natural bodybuilders. You don't need to just up the dose.
It's always funny, yeah. Like if you're not tapped into the like enhanced bodybuilding world, you're not familiar with these kind of debates and conversations. But there will literally be people up there who are like, "Is it still 212 or 202?" The 212. Yeah, I'm old school. It was 202, and then they bumped it to 212, right? Yeah, so you'll have guys who are weighing in for the 212 class, and they're cutting like crazy, and they're like,
yes,
should I just build like 20 extra pounds of muscle and try my shot at the open? And that is a conversation that no high-level natural bodybuilder is having. Just like, should I throw an extra 20 pounds of muscle on and see how I do?
Exactly. Generally, as a natural bodybuilder, you will do best in the weight class where you are leanest and not over-dieted. And it is not uncommon at all that the heavyweight division, at least at the amateur level, is half populated by guys who should have been middleweights. And but at the pro level, then it's just you have a lot more heavyweights who are actually shredded, and that's why they're pros. So anyway, that's bodybuilding. I will say that this has drastically changed with the 212 class, which is not a thing in natural bodybuilding, and classic, which depending upon the division and the federation and the requirements of it, has a height weight cutoff. And in enhanced bodybuilding, or I should say non-tested bodybuilding, there's very little distinction between what is rewarded in classic versus open. It's more just a protocol of reducing drug use. And these guys are doing things like hanging upside down to enhance their height, to increase their weight limit, cutting water. And if you look at the classic competitors, they're actually getting more consistently leaner than the open division bodybuilders, in my opinion, in the NPC and IFBB Pro League now. So their weigh-ins are actually more legit.
What do you mean they're hanging upside down? Like before they go for the height check?
Yes.
Like acutely?
Yes. To try to get another half inch. Because if they can get
you know what?
It's legit. They talk about it on podcasts.
I'm just glad that they introduced the classic division, so it would be just like some dude you would see at the beach. You know what I mean? Just a regular, not these big muscled up bodybuilders who are super shredded. Just a good day at the beach physique. I'm glad that it absolutely played out the way it was intended.
Yeah, it definitely has not become some physiques that could make the Olympia top 10 in the open competing in classic. And them getting to the point now where it is essentially the same physiques that were doing really well in the mid-90s in the open bodybuilding class. Yeah.
And by the way, the mid-90s bodybuilding, for my money's worth, was the best bodybuilding.
I mean, if the goal is just to have it exactly the same but with no guts, then that's been achieved. I guess the definition of classic evolves. We're both just, angry old men yelling at the clouds. Like, we think classic is pumping iron, and now apparently classic is everyone except Dorian Yates and Ronnie Coleman in the 90s. So there you go. It's not Marcus Rule. And
those physique, like back when it was like Flex Wheeler and them going at it. Oh man, when Lee Priester was still doing his thing.
Sean Ray
for sure. Mm-hmm. Those physiques were killing it. Lord knows what they were doing with diuretics. I don't think it was the healthiest age of bodybuilding.
Well,
but
that's actually the one time is in the 2000s, the 90s when they started drug testing because of that. So
yeah.
So that's bodybuilding. here's the thing. The combat literature and the powerlifting literature and the strength athlete literature generally is really interesting. We have a lot of data on what do combat athletes do, what predicts performance, how much can they cut, and there is probably two big differentiating factors, Trex, which I think you'll completely understand as someone who's actually wrestled. One is, what are the determinants of performance in the given combat sport, and then what is the weigh-in period? So one interesting thing is that the amount of weight that athletes will cut is proportionate to how much time they have to rehydrate, because it's a performance-based sport. And like you said, the more electrolytes, water, and glycogen and carbohydrates you lose, the more you have to put in to be able to function. And depending upon the competition format, like you said, maybe you can face multiple opponents and you're facing easier ones early on. But if you're a professional boxer at the title fight, you're fighting one dude or gal for a long time. And then boxing is not the same as wrestling. So there's also been data on combat athletes that looks at not just how much did they lose to make weight and how that affects performance, but how much weight regain did they have. And interestingly, those who regain more weight, those athletes tend to have more competitive success in combat sports broadly, but more specifically in wrestling and mixed martial arts, but not as often in boxing. So this is a striking sport where obviously bigger people can produce more power and force, and they generally tend to be taller and have more wingspan and more reach. But it's not the same thing as we're going to be holding each other and I'm trying to pin you or throw you, and it is very much a body mass dependent sport. So the rate, I keep dyslexifying this, the weight regain is more predictive of performance in grappling and wrestling sports than it is striking sports. So the combination of these two factors, like as you know, wrestling's a 2-hour weigh-in, right? And this was implemented because of some actual tragic deaths in collegiate wrestling in the 90s, and a big kind of public outcry and going, this is crazy. How do we limit how much these wrestlers are cutting? Well, let's restrict them to 2 hours. And that's always the way to get athletes to do things that are more reasonable, is make it mess with their performance. It's performance capitalism is the best way to describe sport. You can talk to them about wellness, health, etc. But if wellness and health don't align with performance, those behaviors aren't going to change, period. So when you have to,
we don't care. And just as an example, there was a time where they said, okay, the 2-hour weigh-ins aren't enough. Now we're going to do body fat and hydration testing and basically tell wrestlers the lowest weight they compete at. They can compete at. And I can tell you, I actually was a goody two-shoes and easily could have and did not cheat because I actually was concerned about my health. And I failed the initial testing, and they're like, the weight class you're trying to do, you cannot do in a healthy way. So you have to move up a little bit. But I can tell you, a tremendous number of people, the minute they implemented that testing, they cheated. They cheated on the hydration testing. So, yeah, no one cares about being healthy. They're like, I'm 17, I'm 20, like, I'll be all right. I'll figure it out, you know? So, yeah, like you said, until it starts hitting performance, nobody gives a damn.
Exactly. So this is one thing that is consistent with weightlifting and powerlifting is they have a 2-hour weigh-in. So they are on the low end compared to combat sports. So some combat sports have more than 24 hours before you're actually competing. Some of these professional one-on-one federations, it really depends. And some are 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours. It's a pretty long gambit. And you very reliably see the longer amount of time you have, the more weight is cut, resulting in that on average, combat athletes cut about 2% more than powerlifters and weightlifters, who generally hang around the 2 to 4% range. Now, the interesting thing about strength sport is there's little data on this. So there's now currently 3 surveys of powerlifters at various levels. There's the one that Kedrick and I did, so Quan, from a couple years back. There's one right around that same time by Nolan, which looked at a broader section of powerlifters at lower competitive levels. We looked at those at the 2018 Worlds. And there's one by Campbell by 2023. And finally, there's G in 2023 who looked at weightlifters who follow a pretty similar pattern in practice of weight cutting. So we've only got like 4 surveys, but it's probably across a few hundred in total powerlifters and approaching that amount in weightlifters. And they're generally cutting in the final week only about 2 to 4% of their body weight. But many of them are also reducing through fat loss, gradual weight loss leading into the competition as well in the prior weeks, although that's less consistent. Now, Trex, here's the thing. You and I know how competitive weightlifting and powerlifting have become, powerlifting especially. And given that, how many powerlifters do you think are cutting weight these days?
How many powerlifters, like as a
Yeah, like the proportion of powerlifters out there, knowing that the tippity top are the ones who are maybe benefiting from it. Out of all powerlifters, how many do you think are cutting weight?
Yeah, Helms, I tell you what, man, you're breaking up pretty hard on my end. But I think I can piece together what you're getting at there. So you're asking what percentage of powerlifters are cutting? I honestly don't know. I could go too low or too high on this. I don't feel like I'm being primed in any direction, but I'm going to say maybe 40% of powerlifters are engaged in weight cutting.
80%.
That's too high.
Here's the thing. It is not advisable, and there's really no benefit that 8 out of 10 powerlifters and weightlifters are cutting weight because they're not at the level where they're even necessarily qualifying for nationals. It makes sense when you do this at Worlds, right? When you survey the athletes at Worlds, the majority are cutting weight. But when you survey all powerlifters, unfortunately still, and weightlifters, the majority are cutting weight.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to cut you off here. You're really breaking up pretty bad. So I think it might be time to maybe have me monologue for a moment, see if your internet can gather its composure, honestly. Get itself together. And then maybe we'll try to wrap up for the evening, or we'll see if we get a little more stability from your internet here. But while we're waiting for you to get your S together, pardon my language, I'm going to answer a question from the Mass Live chat. The reason I'm going to do this is because it is relevant, I think, to this concept of cutting, and then, of course, the process of recovery from cutting. So a lot of cuts, especially for combat sports and powerlifting, you're going to see a water cut where people are kind of manipulating hydration status. Maybe, their electrolyte levels are getting a little bit out of whack. Hopefully not. It's not a good idea to mess with your electrolytes too much, but you do need to engage in this rehydration process after. And so the question was, in order to stay hydrated during long sessions, so like 4+ hours of gymnastics, I end up putting small amounts of salt in my water. So table salt, sodium chloride. Is there any way I can add potassium to this? The sodium is definitely taken care of, and I've honestly developed a taste for salt in my water, but is there any way to manually add potassium too? Now, one of the nice things about the live chat gang here, whether you're joining live in the Iron Culture chat or the Mass chat, is we've got good people, Helms, and they want to help each other out. So there's been a lively discussion, a little bit of chatter about different solutions. And one thing that is true that was brought up is the same way that you can use sodium chloride, table salt. At a lot of grocery stores, they will have potassium chloride. It's basically a salt alternative that uses potassium instead of sodium, or it uses them in a 50-50 split, sodium chloride and potassium chloride. And this is largely marketed toward people who maybe have salt-sensitive hypertension, and maybe they like to still taste salty foods, but they need to keep their sodium intake in check. Now, people have pointed out that this exists. However, I do want to caution that getting into the world of potassium supplementation is a dangerous game if you're not very, very diligent about how much you're taking. So you really don't want to mess up and screw around with really, really high dose potassium. And so that's something to keep in mind, is that if you're going to play that game, it's one that should be played cautiously. And Helms, I don't know if I've ever gotten to the bottom of this, but I have noticed that like if you go out and buy in America a potassium supplement, every one I've ever seen is capped at a certain amount of potassium. It has to be a regulation
It
that
is.
is capping them all at the same. I think it's like 99 milligrams. Does that sound about right?
Yeah,
But
that's
anyway,
what I've seen.
they yeah, so they all tend to be capped at this low level. And that's because even in the wild west of dietary supplements, think of all the bad decisions that have been made by supplement companies, the reckless marketing, the reckless formulations that have been put together. Even they are saying maybe not screw around with, really haphazard dosing of potassium. Because at the end of the day, you mess around, potassium gets out of whack. It's way, way, way higher from a supplement intake relative to your sodium intake. You may be messing around with your ability to properly depolarize and repolarize your heart. And ultimately, it's a recipe for bad news. So, all that is to say, it is true that there is potassium out there, but it is something that you'd want to approach very, very, very cautiously if you go that route. I would offer instead maybe just incorporating more high potassium foods into your diet more generally probably should be adequate to get you where you're trying to go. If not, there's nothing wrong with going with a formulated rehydration beverage like a Pedialyte you could water down to your heart's desire, or a Gatorade or similar, where you're going to be getting a mix of electrolytes, and they're never going to be so distorted and out of whack that you run into any alarming problems. Helms, how you feeling with your internet connection? I see that you've texted me, but I'm a busy man with many screens in front of me.
I was thinking, since we are recording, that I could continue, and even if I necessarily break up, I can finish my points and shoot you a text, say I'm done, even if I sound like distorted static.
Okay, we're folks who are in the live chat. Here's what we're going to do. We are recording this using a technology through the wonders of the nerds in Silicon Valley. We're going to be able to piece this together for the non-live portion of the show. So everyone bear with me. We're going to let Helms limp to the finish line on his little monologue here. It's kind of, Helms, you're kind of like the grandfather who's well beyond that point of senility, and at this point we're just letting you talk for you, because it makes you feel good. It gives you that sense of comfort, and so we're gonna let you talk, and you let us know when you're done with your absolute nonsense, and then we'll probably have to wrap up the show there. What do you say?
Yes, I think that's totally fine. And yeah, for the people live with us, which is our most dedicated, most awesome followers, this will be painful. But for the other, potentially 9,000 people listening per episode, on top of the 100 who are listening, you'll probably appreciate me being able to hopefully finish this. So I will say, one, to Trex's point, there are serious issues with messing with electrolytes and also dehydration and carbohydrates. So when you do those things as a performance athlete, even if you are a power lifter and you only need to be doing one-off expressions of strength, or a weightlifter, there's potential cost there, because being glycogen depleted can impact things, and definitely being dehydrated or having electrolyte imbalance can impact strength more directly. So one of the things that I think is really cool that soon-to-be Dr. Kwan, found in some of his research and has been shown in other data, is that you can use techniques that don't manipulate body water or electrolytes that help you lose a substantial amount of weight. The so-called gut cut or low residue diet has been investigated in non-sporting contexts, and one of the studies that is currently being peer-reviewed that soon-to-be Dr. Kwan did is a gut cut where it was also a moderate carbohydrate restriction. So we're not necessarily trying to get to the point where there's true glycogen depletion in the muscle to any substantial degree, but there is what I would describe as a energy density advantage, because there are 4 kcals per gram of carbohydrate, 9 kcals per gram of fat, and you do tend to see just a lower total food weight when you're on a lower carbohydrate, higher fat diet, in addition to restricting fiber. And on average, we saw like a 1.5% loss of body mass by doing this low fiber, moderate carbohydrate restriction, but no energy restriction for 3 days prior to weigh-ins. So that's probably my top tier suggestion for people who need to lose weight, is that if you can lose 1 to 2% of your body mass through just doing a quote-unquote gut cut, which is just done by restricting fiber, dropping basically out your vegetables and your fruits. I like to just eat a lot of chocolate bars, but energy-dense, higher-fat foods without a whole lot of residue. You can drop a fair amount of weight with no impact on performance, and then you reduce the amount that you might have to manipulate through either water loading, water restriction, or the least ideal thing to do would be passive dehydration or active dehydration. That's exercising in the heat, because then you're exposing yourself to heat stress in addition to dehydration. So as like a tier list, I would say a little bit of gradual weight loss, losing a reasonable amount of body fat, so you're getting nowhere near cat butt. And then from there, a gut cut, where you can lose 1 to 2% of body weight. And then if necessary, I would say a little bit of dehydration, another 1 or 2% at most, using passive means, ideally without heat stress. But if necessary, then a little bit of that. And if you look at the high performers in strength sport, they're typically not dropping any more than 3 to 5% of their body mass. And not everyone is good at that. One thing is there's probably some selection bias here. When you look at world-class powerlifters, those who medal versus those who don't tend to cut a little more weight by about 1 to 2%. But I don't think that's what's causing them to win. I think it's because they have more experience with cuts, and they probably are more resilient when it comes to cutting more weight. So in general, I recommend capping at around 3% of total body mass losses, and you can get half of that just from, in the final week that is, just from that gut cut. So that's all I had to say, Trex. We're going to leave it there. I just wanted to make sure people had kind of the tier list of what's least likely to impact, powerlifting and weightlifting performance.
All right, my man. Sounds good. Well, it sounds terrible, but but with the wonders of editing, it will someday sound good.
That's right.
Thanks everyone for bearing with us with some technical issues. I'm going to try my best to get this video kind of re-edited and re-uploaded in a timely manner. But bear with me because I currently have about 75 things on my to-do list. So we'll see how quickly we can get to it. I do want to acknowledge we had a couple of really good questions in the Iron Culture live chat. I'm going to make a mental note of these, and Helms, I think we can commit to answering them next week to make sure that people get what they came for. So specifically, I'm going to take a little screenshot here just to make sure I don't forget. I was going to read them out for fidelity, so we would have them, but yeah, I'll tease them. So one of the good questions was, I've been enjoying starting my workouts with isolations, then moving on to compounds just because I like it. Am I leaving gains on the table if the focus is hypertrophy? So doing leg extensions before squats, for example, flies before bench press. So we'll get into that next week. Another question was, if the focus is on getting stronger in powerlifting, but not wanting to totally neglect aesthetics, is it a reasonable approach to program all exercises that are directly linked to squat, bench, deadlift in a normal approach, and then just add in bodybuilding work for arms, shoulders, etc., using drop sets, rest pause sets, and things like that? So some of those time-saving strategies to squeeze in some extra volume, essentially on top of a base powerlifting program. So a couple of really good practical questions. We will get to those next week because I know Helms is going to want to chime in. And folks, I just can't bear to listen to this nonsense coming out of his computer. New Zealand, God bless their hearts, they are a few decades behind in technology. They do not have internet, unfortunately. And I also hear really bad hiking in New Zealand. That was something we learned in the chat. Just not a beautiful country in the least. So you hate to see that, but Helms, I wish you the best over there. The nice upside that you have is the foreshadowing of being perpetually about a day ahead and knowing what is to come in the future. So I always appreciate when you give me little tidbits about areas I should avoid due to potential violence and catastrophe. So thank you for that. Everyone, I think that does it for tonight's episode. We can say bye to the blurry image that vaguely looks like Eric Helms. We will sign off here. Thanks so much for joining us. I do want to say, if you like Iron Culture, you support the cause, and you want to support what we're doing, A lot of ways you can do that. You can like, rate, subscribe, review, share it with a friend. Tell the whole internet how much you like it. Bring more people into the tent so they can enjoy the show. Of course, if you really want to be a top tier, gold star, platinum member subscriber, what you could do is become a member of the Mass community. The Mass Research Review makes this whole thing possible. Go over to massresearchreview.com to learn more about subscribing and becoming a member of the Mass community today. Everyone, thanks so much for joining us. We will see you with another episode in approximately 1 week. So until then, take care and enjoy your workouts.